friends. Today we're going to continue reading our book Because of Winn-Dixie. Today we're going to read chapters 3 and 4. This book is written by DiCamillo and published by Scholastic Readers. So before we get started, we're going to do what good readers do. Remember, we're going to think about what we read before so that our brain is ready to get into the new reading and keep going. So first of all, let's think about who the characters are in our story, okay? So far, we've been introduced to three main characters, okay? So the first character is on our cover. Who's that? Winn-Dixie the dog, right? And Winn-Dixie was a dog that was found inside a grocery store, and nobody could find its owner, could they? He didn't appear to have an owner. How did they know he didn't have an owner? Well, he was very dirty. But just because a dog is dirty doesn't mean they don't have an owner. He was also very skinny, which would make you think, what do you think? That he had not eaten very well, right? So maybe nobody had fed him for a long time. Now that might be a clue to tell someone that he didn't have an owner. What else? She didn't mention this, but I don't think I see a collar around his neck. So maybe he didn't have those things that dogs wear around their neck when they have an owner. Owners usually put a collar on their neck and then they have a tag that tells where to find the owner. It gives the owner's name and the owner's phone number so that that dog can always have someone find their owner if they get lost, okay? So Winn-Dixie, he also had patches of bare skin where his fur had fallen off. Yeah. So he was in the grocery store making a mess, wasn't he? And we're not supposed to have dogs in the grocery store usually. So it just so happened that our second main character, India Opal Baloney, was in the grocery store as well. And she was there getting some groceries for her daddy when all of a sudden she heard this ruckus, this people yelling, right? The store manager was yelling because Winn-Dixie was making a mess and running around the store. And so Opal went over there to see what was happening. And when the store manager said that he wanted to take Winn-Dixie to the pound, remember, the pound is a place that we take dogs who don't have owners because we have to put them in cages sometimes. They can't just run around free. And hopefully they'll find a new owner at the pound, but sometimes they don't. So Opal did not want him to have to go to the pound. She said, what did she say? He's mine! He's my dog. All of a sudden, Opal had a dog. She thought maybe she'd done something wrong, but she decided to take him home. So she took Winn-Dixie home with her to meet the third main character. Who is that? Her daddy. Yeah. There's another name that she uses when she talks about her daddy. Do you remember? She calls him the preacher. Now in America, preacher is another word for minister or a person who leads a church, who's in charge of a church. Okay, and that's what her daddy did. That was his job. He was in charge of a church. So she called him the preacher. Now she also referred to him she said he was kind of like a turtle because he kind of kept his head down and didn't pay attention to anything around him. He didn't really pay attention to Opal either. And so she said he was like a turtle. But when he met Winn-Dixie, Opal was scared that maybe he would make her take him to the pound. She wouldn't be able to keep him. But what happened? He liked Winn-Dixie, didn't he? Because what is Winn-Dixie like? What is his personality like? Is he a mean dog or a friendly dog? He's a friendly dog. He likes to lick you. And what else does this dog do that's really cool? He can smile, remember? He pulls his lips back and you can see his teeth. So, her daddy said at the very end of chapter 2, "You can stay, Winn-Dixie." And Opal thought, I think my daddy's coming out of his shell. Kind of like a turtle, pulls his head out of his shell and starts to look around. So, is her daddy really a turtle? No, but she's using that example because that's what she thinks of when she thinks of her daddy. She thinks of a turtle. That's what makes her remember kind of what she feels like when she sees him that way. Okay, we're going to read chapter 3 and find out what Opal does to Winn-Dixie to make him spruce up a little bit, okay? And we're going to read chapter 4 to find out something really important about this story, but I'm not going to tell you quite yet. So, chapter 3, find out what Opal does to Winn-Dixie. Here we go. I started in on Winn-Dixie right away, trying to clean him up. First, I gave him a bath. I used the garden hose and some baby shampoo. He stood still for it, but I could tell he didn't like it. He looked insulted. That means, like, what if somebody had said something about you that wasn't nice? You would be insulted. And the whole time, he didn't show me his teeth or wag his tail once. That's kind of what dogs are usually like when they have to take a bath. Dogs really don't like taking baths. They don't mind being dirty. It doesn't bother them. After he was all washed and dried, I brushed him really good. I used my own hairbrush and worked real hard at all the knots and patches of fur that were stuck together. He didn't mind being brushed. He wiggled his back like it felt pretty good. The whole time I was working on him, I was talking to him, and he listened. I told him how we were alike. Alike means the same. See, I said, you don't have any family, and neither do I. Well, I've got the preacher, of course, but I don't have a mama. I mean, I have one, but I don't know where she is. She left when I was 3 years old. I can't hardly remember her. And I bet you don't remember your mama much either. So, we're almost like orphans. Now, orphan is a word that means a person who does not have a mama or a daddy. Their mama and their daddy have died. That's called a person who is an orphan. So, Opal is not quite an orphan. She does have a daddy. But I think she might feel like an orphan a little bit because remember she said her daddy doesn't pay a lot of attention. He's always busy working. She kind of feels like that, yeah. Winn-Dixie looked straight at me when I said that to him, like he was feeling relieved to finally have someone understand his situation. Relieved means you feel better. Yeah. So do you think you would feel better if somebody else understands how you feel? Yeah. I nodded my head at him and I went on talking. I don't even have any friends because I had to leave them all behind when we moved here from Whatley. Whatley's up north in Florida. Have you ever been to North Florida? Winn-Dixie looked down at the ground like he was trying to remember if he had. You know what, I said, ever since we moved here, I've been thinking about my mama extra hard, more than I ever did when I was in Whatley. Winn-Dixie twitched his ears and raised his eyebrows. I think the preacher thinks about my mama all the time, too. He's still in love with her. I know that because I heard the ladies at the church in Whatley talking about him. They said he's still hoping she'll come back. But he doesn't tell me that. He won't talk to me about her at all. I want to know more about her, but I'm afraid to ask the preacher. I'm afraid he'll get mad at me. Winn-Dixie looked at me hard, like he was trying to say something. What? I said. He stared at me. You think I should make the preacher tell me about her? Winn-Dixie looked at me so hard he sneezed. I'll think about it, I said. When I was done working on him, Winn-Dixie looked a whole lot better. He still had his bald spots, but the fur that he did have cleaned up nice. It was all shiny and soft. You could still see his ribs, but I intended to feed him good, and that would take care of that. I couldn't do anything about his crooked yellow teeth because he got into a sneezing fit every time I started brushing them with my toothbrush, and I finally had to give up. But for the most part, he looked a whole lot better, and so I took him into the trailer and showed him to the preacher. Daddy, I said. He said. He was working on a sermon and kind of muttering to himself. Daddy, I want to show you the new Winn-Dixie. The preacher put down his pencil and rubbed his nose and finally looked up. Well, he said, smiling real big at Winn-Dixie. Well now, don't you look handsome? Winn-Dixie smiled back at the preacher. He went over and put his head in the preacher's lap. He smells nice too, said the preacher. He rubbed Winn-Dixie's head and looked into his eyes. Daddy, I said real quick before I lost all my nerve, I've been talking to Winn-Dixie. Is that right? Said the preacher as he scratched Winn-Dixie's head. I've been talking to him and he agreed with me that since I'm 10 years old, you should tell me 10 things about my mama. Just 10 things, that's all. The preacher stopped rubbing Winn-Dixie's head and held real still. I could see him thinking about pulling his head back into his shell. 1 thing for each year I've been alive, I told him. Please? Winn-Dixie looked up at the preacher and kind of gave him a nudge with his nose. The preacher sighed. He said to Winn-Dixie, I should have guessed you were going to be trouble. Then he looked at me. Come on, Opal, he said. Sit down and I will tell you 10 things about your mama.